My name is Kim McRae, and I'm the Adult Programs Coordinator at the Shelburne Museum. And I'm one of the members of the collaborative planning team for the Conversations program. And we're delighted to see so many of you out and about today for the art portion of our Conversations, which is a collaboration between the Shelburne Museum, All Souls Interfaith Gathering, Shelburne Farms, and the Pierson Library here in Shelburne. And so it is my pleasure, without further ado, to thank Fran Stoddard for being here today, and also Bonnie and Tracey, and I will turn it over to them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kim. So this year, the committee decided to do authors and pick very divergent authors around our themes that we do every year of spirit, art, and nature, bringing together, of course, Shelburne Farms, Shelburne Museum, and this space, and wonderfully, Shelburne Library this year, which brought this whole idea of authors and some authors to this conversation. And so it's been a really interesting challenge. And they picked these wonderful authors doing very, very different things. And today we have Tracey Campbell Pearson. She's a children's book author and illustrator. She was originally from Connecticut, and I love her website is fantastic. So you've got to check out her bio, which notes, among other things, that as a kid, her favorite book was The Art of El Greco. She says she took it everywhere. I really liked his painting of the cardinal in red. I thought he was Santa Claus. Pierson went to Parsons School of Design in New York City to study fashion illustration until a children's book icon prompted her to change her major to children's book illustration. We'll get to that in a little bit. Although she worked a bit as an artist for American Greeting Corporation in Ohio, she's principally worked as an illustrator, eventually settling in Jericho, where she and her husband raised 2 artists and a menagerie of animals. She's illustrated dozens of books and is also the author of at least 7, author and illustrator of at least 7, so thank you for being here. I'll also introduce Bonnie, and we're gonna go back and forth the rest of this hour. Bonnie Tocher Clause is a writer and independent scholar who divides her time between Philadelphia and South Royalton, Vermont. She retired from a long career as an editor and administrator for, that sounds a little bit better, for principally academic nonprofit organizations, including a museum. When she first came to Vermont, she discovered Edward Hopper had spent time here, but very few people knew that, and that Hopper happened to paint very close to her home. So she realized that this, she became very curious about this, started collecting information, and realized it would make a great book, and hence Edward Hopper in Vermont. So we are going to be looking Hopper a lot, and the wonderful imagination of Tracey Campbell Pearson. So Tracey, I'm going to start with you. When you went to New York City to study fashion illustration, you actually met Maurice Sendak in an elevator. He was a professor there, and you were at angst about some things. Tell us a little that story quickly, and how he influenced you and what you have become.
Okay. While I was studying fashion, everyone told me that I should be taking this class in children's book illustration, and I had no idea who Maurice was, and I became passionate about the process within the 3rd class of studying with him, and it was in the elevator going down after the 3rd class when I decided that this is what I wanted my career to be. I said to Maurice, I don't know what I'm doing in children's books, in fashion, and he said, I don't either. And so I went to the bookstore to see who this man was, if I was going to spend the next 2 years with him, and I discovered he did Where the Wild Things Are. And what I learned most with him, which is amazing, was the process of words and pictures working together, which is what a picture book is, but also every story has a different feel, a different art, a different trim size. It being true to that story and is what makes it exciting. Every book I do looks different. It's a different shape, different size. And it's all about how those words and pictures and having a rhythm and a flow that almost create a dance between the words and pictures is what you're doing. And the other great thing I learned from him was working to music when I illustrate, which I do.
Do you choose different types of music depending on, I mean, you also, of course, illustrate for other people, so you've read that book. Do you then choose the music, or is it within a certain genre? Is it just in general you use music, or it's
I think the story chooses the music.
Huh.
And Elephant Story, my newest one, was Stan Getz and Miles Davis. So it really depends. It can be opera, it can be Gregorian chants, it can be folk music, classical music. Maurice worked to Mozart, but I have an eclectic mix.
Terrific. And Bonnie, you went to Barnard College, also New York. It was there that you first fell for Edward Hopper's work. Could you tell us that story?
Well, I didn't meet him in an elevator. Actually, Edward Hopper was famous for walking upstairs. He lived in Greenwich Village and was actually still alive when I was in college, but I never had the good fortune to run into him. But rather than elevators, he and his wife walked up 72 stairs to their studio in Washington Square. At any rate, by the time I was in college, Hopper was very famous. He was elderly. He had a couple of major retrospectives at the Whitney Museum. I loved going to the New York museums. I fell in love with Hopper. I mean, he's really the quintessential New York urban artist, as we think of him until we found out about his being in Vermont. And basically, I just always loved his work.
Great. One of the things, and actually, is everybody hearing okay? We just wanted to, we did something a little bit different with the audio, and I just want to check. There are, it's great, there's not much echo, but there are assisters if you need them. Okay, thank you. Hopper's Vermont paintings, we have a sketch and a painting here. These are copies. They're going for millions of dollars now. They were principally by watercolors, I believe.
Yes, they were all watercolors, which is primarily in the summers. Hopper left New York City and worked outside. He and his wife had a home in South Truro on Cape Cod, and built in the early 1930s. Mm-hmm. But from the time he was a fairly young and struggling artist, and even before he knew his wife, Josephine Nivison, they both went to the art colonies in New England at Gloucester and in Maine. And most of his summer paintings were done out of doors in plein air, and they're watercolors. And that was the case for Vermont.
Well, and so I want to talk to Tracey about watercolor, because this is your primary medium.
Yes.
So tell us a bit about why you've chosen that medium, and what can you say about it, and why you think, why was that a good medium for Hopper when he is doing these summer sojourns, perhaps? Or
Well, one, for me, it's fast, and I'm impatient. It also offers surprises. And you can't tell watercolor what to do. So you can sort of control it, but then, and you can also make a real mess out of it, and then you just let it go and start something new. But the layering it and just, it's so quick, and you can get a feeling out of it that you can't get, I think, out of oil painting. And it's very portable, and it's something I take it with me. I sketch at concerts and subways and places, and I will often pack a little thing of watercolors as well, and a bottle of water. So
Great. But for your books, of course, you've kind of worked things out, and you're a little bit more careful with them, or maybe yes, maybe no. It depends on the music, right?
It depends on the music. Well, this I was very careful with. Bob trying to get those spots was very careful, but also trying to keep a looseness in it. And the challenge with Elephant Story, my goal with that every book is different, and my challenge with Elephant Story was, how can I keep that loose, fresh aspect of the art that I have in the first dummy and the first sketches, and hold on to that after you've done the artwork 10, 20
Right.
times,
Yeah.
and still make it feel like it just poured on the page. And so that's the challenge. So when Hopper's doing a piece or another artist is doing one piece, then you just let the paint flow and then you move on to the next piece. If you're doing it for reproduction, the challenge is to keep that feeling,
Yeah.
but you've done it 3 or 4 times, and you have to have room for the type.
Right. Yeah.
So, Bonnie, how else so one of the things that was different with Hopper, of course, we know Night Watchman, the folks in that diner. You know, we all think of that as a Hopper painting. And I think of his other beautiful show in Boston recently with a lot of exterior architecture and interiors with one person, but they're very urban. But they've got, these are very different from this. Can you speak a little bit to how the Vermont paintings in particular are different from all the rest of his paintings?
Well, it's interesting to hear what Tracey has to say about working in watercolor, because I think, especially when Hopper's Vermont watercolors were exhibited here at Middlebury College Museum of Art, and I hope some of you saw them there because it was really a fantastic show. It was the first time the paintings had been returned to Vermont since Hopper put them in the trunk of his car and drove back to New York. And so that was very exciting. But also to see these works in person gave me a much greater appreciation. When I wrote the book, I'd only seen a couple of them in person. And really being able to look at the watercolors, see the transparency, see something of the way Hopper worked, because he sketched first in pencil and then painted over. But they have a fluidity and a lightness that's missing in his larger oils, which are really the things that he's famous for.
Right.
And the oils often are architectural, like the one in back of you with a gas station. They're often the paint is thicker, the colors are heavier. They have a different mood and a very different feeling.
How do you think this difference reflects a different aspect of his interior life when he's in Vermont?
Well, may I read?
Sure, that was, yes, it was coming right up, but go for it. Do the reading now.
Fran had asked me to select an excerpt to read, and I chose this one because I think it does focus on something about Hopper's Vermont work that is not only different, but I think unique to his Vermont paintings. This, for anyone who has the book, is from chapter 3, pages 51 and 52. And in a conversation with Hopper, Brian O'Doherty, who was an artist married to the art historian Barbara Novak, and he did some of the most intensive interviews and filming with Hopper and recorded some wonderful things. So in a conversation with Hopper, Brian O'Doherty identified trees as a continuing motif in his paintings, asking Hopper if he agreed that his woods were menacing or, like Robert Frost's, lovely, dark, and deep. Hopper did not respond to the menacing part of the question, but he replied that he admired Frost and he especially liked his poems Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening and Come In. In the latter poem, the narrator pauses at the edge of the woods. Inside it was dark, hearing the song of an unseen bird. Frost's image is much like the woods in Hopper's drawing of Vermont trees, which I have up on the easel there. Dark, pillared by tree trunks, mysterious and yet enticing. But Hopper's Vermont trees are more like window frames than walls, with the viewer an outsider but able to look in. In contrast to paintings such as Gas, where the woods are seen from the perspective of a traveler, a passerby who sees only the impression of trees, Hopper's Vermont woods are observed by a more contemplative viewer, one who takes the time to see the individual trees and their different shapes and textures, the floor of the forest underneath, the spaces between the trunks, hinting at the landscape within. This again reflects something of Frost's poetic vision and perhaps a glimpse of the visions that his poems invoked for Hopper. Raphael Sawyer, Hopper's friend and fellow artist, believed that Hopper painted mentally all the time. Vermont trees and the wooded hillsides in the Vermont watercolors of 1936 may reflect images that Hopper drew in his mind as he read Robert Frost, images that found reality when he discovered the real landscape that had in turn inspired the Vermont poet. To me, that captures a great deal of what I see in Hopper's Vermont images. And again, the difference with the trees in the gas, major famous oil painting, the trees are, another poet called them menacing but ominous. They're like a wall, an impenetrable wall. His landscapes in Vermont, the landscape is lighter, brighter, opens up. And I think it reflects the side of Hopper. He's often spoken of as a very depressed, repressed character. And his paintings often speak to people of solitude and isolation in a lonely sense. I think the Vermont works show a lighter side of Hopper, an introspective side, but the side of the man who appreciated beauty and not just architectural beauty, but the softer side of the landscape, the more poetic side.
But I think you quote somebody who said he was also horrified by the picturesque. And he avoided, like the covered bridges and the steeples and the,
a very good point.
The iconic parts of Vermont.
Yeah.
So to move on, Tracey, I thought this was such an interesting investigation that Bonnie had done about what's the interior? How does illustration speak to the interior, thinking and feeling? So where do you go when you're illustrating something? You're, of course, always thinking about that. You're thinking about, these kind of concrete ideas, but you're also expressing interior feelings and ideas. And how do you go about that?
Absolutely. And I think that's also part of the difference, too, that's interesting with what you speak of Hopper is when you're doing watercolors you have to be so present. Mm-hmm. And so your mind really has to be in that space. And I think if you're doing oils or something that you're just something tighter, you can wander, but you have to be present. And I think that's mostly what happens in that interior space. So, an elephant is one where it's total joy and a combination getting in that space with the music. And sometimes I forget that I have to remember and say, oh, this is for reproduction. I better be careful what I'm doing. But then if I mess up, I start another one. But, and this was more repetitive. Actually, I designed the cover. This is the case for the book Bob, and I got this feather pattern. I started doing that when my son was taking his first driving lesson, and he was out, and I was waiting for him to come back. So my brain was in a totally different place than it is here. So I think, yes, absolutely. And what I have to do in a book is the sketches, all the preliminary work, the storyboard, getting the words and pictures to work together. I have to know, and that can be very tight, I have to know where everything is so that when I get to the artwork, it can be just fun and joy. And you have to think, like to get this, to get this face on this cat, I'm there saying, I'm talking, people would think I'm crazy. And I'm having this same conversation because it's just a little line. I mean, he's very baffled. And you have to think, you have to be, so you're acting too in there. Yeah, that's crazy.
We got Bonnie's reading, so why don't we get yours? Do you have your book? Or did you give them all away?
I gave them away.
We'll bring one back.
give them away. There's not a lot of text in there.
So this is your new book.
Yes.
And it'll be a pretty quick read. She said, well, maybe I can just do part of it, but I don't think it will take her more than a minute and a half to read the whole thing, so it's delightful.
Okay, so this is Elephant's story, and this is one of those books. This was an absolute joy. The idea landed, fully formed, and just arrived. And this and Bob, I think, were the two gift books. Sometimes you work and write over and over again. This one just came to me. So these are the end papers, which are...
This is the dummy.
Yeah.
Great. I might.
So this is Elephant's story, and this is Gracie walking. Often I start my stories right on the title page, the front matter. So this one starts, the day Gracie lost her favorite book, Elephant found it. Sniff, 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 and oops, the words went up his trunk. And the words are, once upon a time there was. They wiggled and jiggled and squiggled inside. Elephant sneezed. Ah, 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 chew! Letters flew everywhere. Elephant tried to put the letters back into words, but they were all mixed up. He went to his friends for help. There are all the letters, and these are all for once upon a time there was. Alligator wanted to eat the letters, so he makes the word chew. Seal wanted to juggle the letters, so he makes the word spin.
I would like to drink the water.
I was going to say, I have your water. Tap me if you need it. The monkeys wanted to toss the letters. Throw. The bear just wanted to sleep. Snore. Poor elephant, his friends were no help at all. He sniffed the letters back into his trunk and went home. Along came Gracie. She was looking for her book. There it was. Elephant was sitting on it. Gracie looked at the empty book. She looked at Elephant. Where are my words? She asked. Gracie pulled and pulled and pulled. When that didn't work, she tickled his trunk. Elephant sneezed. Ah, 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 chew! He showered Gracie with letters. Gracie showed Elephant how to make the letters into words. Together, they put the words back in the book. Then Gracie read the words to Elephant. Once upon a time there was, and she added some of her own, a girl called Gracie who had made a new friend. His name was Elephant. And what's been fun with this is when I read this to young kids, they all break out in the alphabet song when you get to the end. And this is me on the back holding my favorite book, El Greco. And what was amazing with this book was when I finished it, and I was trying to do the cover and get it past the committee because I wanted the back on the cover. And I was talking to my editor, and she said, well, what if Gracie just holds the book? And I looked next to me, and there was this picture that I have, my family picture of me holding El Greco. And I said, oh my goodness, I'm Gracie. I'm the child that lost the book. So I know they're always in there, but sometimes it takes us a while to make that connection. So the book was totally done.
Interior
yeah,
life.
it is. It's very strange. Yeah.
That's great.
That's beautiful. I don't know if you want to speak, just having read that, to, I might want to make sure that you guys have time to ask a few questions too. That connection between illustration and words.
So when you're doing a picture book, every story has its own feeling, and it's sort of that rhythm and flow. And this is, it's really hard to describe. With this one, So what I was trying to do, every book I do, I try to think of something visually that I'm trying to do and create with the story. This one, Bob, he needed to be full bleed. He needed to go off the page. Bob learns how to moo and woof and make all these noises. I wanted a book where kids from the back could just, that it was sort of exploding out of the book. Elephant's Story is also a book about friendship, a really kind of sweet story between these two. So I wanted this lightness to the artwork. And then as an artist, my challenge besides the looseness, I was thinking of space and shape and where he fits on the page and how that works. So also the letters become part of the art. So when I went to New York with this for them to the designer to put the type in, I actually sat there with the editor and the art director saying, I want the W over here. I want the O over here. Oh, no, a little bit over here. Oh, could you put it just as... So when you turn from page to page, it's how it...
Your scarf on your mic.
Oh.
Great, thanks.
It's how it... it's just all sort of a rhythm and flow. So a book should sort of... It kind of builds and builds and goes to this crescendo and then quiets down and goes back. So it's that rhythm. And it doesn't have to rhyme. It's just sort of that feeling from page to page. So,
thank you. Inspiring.
yeah.
So back to Bonnie, and I think I'm going to connect again around this Vermont piece. Hopper also seemed to be influenced by his wife.
Yes.
Certainly. I think, and in a way, I think it was in your book that it said it might have been that he did watercolors, that she encouraged him to do watercolors.
Yes, she
fast,
definitely
right?
did.
Yeah.
Yeah. When they met, which was probably maybe in New York, but probably in Gloucester during one of their summers when they were both there at the same time, she had been doing watercolors for years. They actually had studied with the same teacher in New York, Robert Henry. And when they met, they were in their late 30s. And Hopper had been working as an illustrator, which he claimed, I think he was a marvelous illustrator, but he claimed to despise the work. And when his watercolors began selling, his paintings began selling, he was glad to give it up. But Joe actually encouraged him this one summer when they hooked up to take up watercolor again. And then she was instrumental in seeing that he was included in a watercolor exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum in I think it was 23. And that's where he sold the second painting of his life. Now, he was born in 1882. He sold his first painting at the Armory Show in 1913, but the second finally to the Brooklyn Museum in 1923. Quite amazing. And Joe apparently was absolutely instrumental in, well, from then on, I think, in helping him to build his career.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I guess he came up here sometime in the 20s, but again in the 30s, and they actually stayed at a farm that's near your house now,
Yeah.
the Slater Farm. And I'm wondering how you imagine, because we don't know much about Hopper. He was a pretty quiet guy.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of work for a scholar to kind of pick up from these pieces what's going on.
Well, it's one of the things that was the most fun, and for me, I would say, I'm not an artist, so do I dare to say creative? Parts of the book was to imagine, I mean, because Hopper stayed at a farm essentially right down the road from where we live, and driving by the scenes that he painted, seeing the farmhouse where he stayed, which is still there, exploring. Mike and I found the sugar house that's in his painting. It's now a residence. There's one painting called Bob Slater's Hill. You would think all hills in Vermont look more or less alike. This is, as soon as you see it, it's very distinctive. So we could actually picture the Hoppers driving around as they did in their cars. You know, in their case, it was Hopper driving, Joe sketching. In our case, it was Mike driving and me taking photographs. And we could really put ourselves in their shoes. And then also, I had the very good fortune to find and connect with a man named Bob Slater, Robert Allen Slater, who was 7 years old when the Hoppers were on the farm. And he had very clear memories, probably enhanced by the passage of time and many years of telling the story. But this was a great event in his family's life. When Hopper stayed on the farm in 1937, he was already famous. He'd been featured in a 4-page spread in Life magazine. I don't think anyone in Vermont connected this, but at any rate, Bob Slater, who when I spoke to him was in his 80s, living in California, passed away this past summer, I'm sad to say. But we had many wonderful telephone conversations, and the Hopper that he remembered was a rather congenial man who loved, as he said, Hopper loved my father. Followed him around on the farm, tried to milk a cow, which Bob told me he was no good at. But he describes him as a very relaxed person who really enjoyed the day-to-day life of the farm. And basically, they stayed, Edward and Joe, for a month at a time at the Slater's farm. Ate meals with the family, slept upstairs. And that's a very different kind of man than we usually hear about or read about.
And I wonder if that's different from his experience on Cape Cod or Maine. I mean, to actually stay on a farm. Do you think his experience of Vermont was different? I mean, he really wasn't here all that much.
No, he wasn't. And I think his life in Cape Cod was probably similar in the sense that they had neighbors who were farmers, and they had friends who were not artists, who were ordinary people. And so there probably are some similarities, but I think was more interested in investigating that aspect of Hopper's life by tracing his footsteps and sort of trying to get into his shoes and talking with someone who actually knew him and had some personal recollection. There's not a great deal of that in other things that are written about Hopper, other than they tend to focus on his relationships with other artists.
Right. How did this affect you and the way you experience Vermont and nature?
Yeah.
What did that do to drive around and try to find these places, even post-Irene, which could have been difficult in some cases?
Yeah. In a number of ways, I would say most important, and I learned this originally from looking at the work of other Vermont artists, particularly Sabra Field, who lives and works in our area, and whose work I loved from the moment I saw it. But the more I see it, the more I look at Sabra's renditions of Vermont, the more I see in the real landscape. And vice versa. Mike and I will look out the window and say, oh, it's a Sabra sky today. Well, it's a Vermont sky, but Sabra got it. There are certain things in Hopper's paintings that have opened my eyes to what's in the landscape. The picture of the trees, which is a drawing, a charcoal drawing, that's very much like the view we see actually from our bed, looking up. We have big windows and we look up a hillside and look in between the trunks of the trees. And so Hopper's work has enlightened my vision of Vermont quite really.
So Bonnie, how does the Vermont landscape factor into your creative process?
Well, I think, and it's interesting to hear you talk too, because I think it does. And I think any artist, when you live in Vermont and you're surrounded by this beauty, you can't help but be affected by it. And especially for me, I'm a person who loves to draw people. I'm intimidated by trees. I'm not intimidated by drawing somebody I don't know on a subway, but a tree is a scary thing. And I've learned to understand them more and look at the landscape more. But when you live in Vermont, and I can see Mount Mansfield from where I am, my mountains start taking on that shape of Mount Mansfield. And just the color and the light and the landscape starts pouring into your work, and the beauty that's around you is, and the light and the color. And I think also for artists, having two young artists that live in cities and talking about residencies and leaving the city and listening to what you say about Hopper, I think it would be interesting to compare and know the city person and the person that comes out, and the difference between doing oils and work and this more architectural work and shape. And part of it is the medium, but also you wonder if part of it is his studio, his space, his light, where he is. And then when an artist leaves that and tries a new environment, for me it's the opposite. I go to the city and leave the country. But it just puts you in a different space emotionally and with your artwork when you come someplace else.
Well, it's interesting because, Bonnie, you also talk a lot about how he needed to escape Cape Cod. I've done everything here, and I've done, and that's one of the reasons he came to Vermont was to experience new things. And yet, what I'm most interested in is this, so you know a little bit of that about him, this whole thing about what you do in urban and Vermont. You're still speculating in your book a lot about what he's thinking and why he needs to escape to Vermont and what he needs to do, because he didn't do a lot of interviews, or when he did, it's very interesting. He answers part of the question, but not all of it. I know about that. But if you could speak to the kind of the fine line between research and the writer's imagination, where did you feel comfortable, and were there places you didn't feel comfortable? There's a lot of would, could, he probably thought in your book, right?
Yes, and it's because it's for a number of reasons. One is that Hopper did say so little about himself, and he didn't like interpretations of his work. He often rejected what people said. He would say, it doesn't mean anything. Probably the most succinct thing he said was, "I'm after me." Well, whatever that means. If you can't get to know him, then it's hard to know what he was after. But I've lost my train.
Well, just that, so you speculated a lot.
I did, and the other reason I speculated is because I'm not an artist. I'm not an art historian. And I did have the critic kind of sitting on my shoulder a lot, saying, well, if you say that, so-and-so may criticize it, or this isn't documented. And I did want to write, it is history. There's a lot of facts in it. There's a lot of true stories about Hopper. And I did want to add something.
And I think the critics love this about the book, I think, for the most part.
Not all the art historians did.
I'm not surprised by that, right.
But Vermonters like it, and that pleases me more than anything. Now, what I felt most hesitant about was the comparison that I read in here with Robert Frost.
Interesting.
And because I'm not a poet or a professor of literature, shall we say, but that is something that very few people have written about, and no one had written about it in terms of connecting. He had a lifelong love of Robert Frost, and that fact is very well documented. But no one before had tried or had seen, as I think I see, Robert Frost's poetry in his paintings.
Right.
So that was the farthest out that I went with speculation. And I still feel good about it. And that's one reason I chose this excerpt to read today. So thank you for asking me that question.
Good connection. one more question for you, Tracey, and then we'll get to the audience. I do have more, but you, actually somebody asked me to have you talk about your sense of self as an artist. And I kind of thought, your kids are also artists. It is a very artistic family. What does it mean to you to choose that path or to have chosen that path? What does that whole artist, I'm an artist, mean to you?
Well, I feel so lucky and so fortunate, and I think what it is it is who I am, and trying to, I will never retire. I won't, it's not something that you stop doing. And when you are an artist or an author, when you're a creative person, that you never shut that off. So when I'm looking at the audience and I'm seeing people, I'm drawing all of you. And I see colors, I see shapes, I hear things, and it's part of it is also just always trying to be, you're always present, but you're always on another planet at the same time. And I'm married to someone who is very much like this, and I'm very much like this, and we create a great balance for each other. And that is sort of the joke in our family with my children choosing their careers as artists, is they said, well, we saw what Dad does and we see what you do, so I mean, you have a lot more fun.
And what does Dad do? Well, yeah, never mind. He's content with it, whatever it is. He's content.
It's much more like this. So you really, and you do have to know who you are, but the other secret is to being an artist is you never can think really highly of yourself. You always have to, you're always growing, you're always trying to get better. I haven't made a really great book yet. I keep hoping that one day I will, but every time, you always have to try to grow. And at the minute you get overconfident and think that you're really great, it's absolutely not good. So
thank you.
Yeah, I'm just a lucky person.
Some questions from our wonderful audience. Thanks for coming out, for either Bonnie or Tracey. I can keep going, but I'd really like to open this up. Yes.
Tracey, how will you know when you've created a great book? Is it
I don't think it, I don't,
you or something external?
I don't think I will ever create the perfect book. When I did Elephant, created Elephant, I felt like I was really disappointed that Maurice Sendak passed away before it was done, because it felt like a book, the story that I had finally figured out how to make a picture book that was take a picture book form down to its simplest form, but still have more in the story that was sort of layered and hidden. I said, I've got it. And then when it was finished, I was like, well, yeah, but I could have done this or I could have done that. So I think I learn with each book, but I don't think I will ever get there. And even Maurice Sendak, when I was studying with him, he did Outside Over There was the book he was working on. He brought in the pencil sketches and he's like, oh, I don't know. And we're saying, whoa. He said, beautiful. Well, it's okay. So I don't know if anybody, it would be interesting to to find out if any artist, no one I know has created that perfect work.
Right. Keep striving for it,
Yeah,
though. I mean, of course. Interesting question.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm curious about Maurice Sendak with Where the Wild Things Are. I mean, that became so popular, and did he ever say that felt like a wonderful book to him, or was it just his best effort?
No, because that, that was one of the things that I learned from Maurice and that I love about him, is that he, as an artist, was always growing and reaching and trying. And so he went on to do operas and to do theater and to do all sorts of things and branch out. So I think the hardest part probably is people wanting to keep him with the wild things. And as an artist, he was always reaching and striving for something else.
Can I make one comment?
Yes, please. Yeah.
I loved hearing what you had to say about creating the book, the whole book, which I think most people who just write books would be very envious of. Because when you write a book like this, you have absolutely no say in what shape it is, what size it is, what's on the cover, how the reproductions are sized, etc. You just have to hold your breath and cross your fingers and hope. Now, I am delighted with what the University Press of New England did with this book, but it's a very different experience than being able to essentially have your whole book be a piece of art and a creation that you're involved with, that really reflects and gives substance to everything that you've imagined it would be. I think that's great.
Well, and that's something that I learned also from Maurice from the very beginning with each book that I did, that it is about the size, the shape, the paper stock, and all the things, and it's something that I fought for. Early on with my very first books, they were all about the same trim size, which is a standard trim size. And I finally felt like I made it in publishing when I said, this is my book and this is the shape that I want it to be. And so
I love the way you integrated the barcode on the back.
Oh, and that's, barcodes are, it's always, what do you do with the barcode? But that is my final art. I bring these around, but the final art and what people see is and hold in their hands is the book.
And is the publishing world, of course, children's book publishing is probably a whole world in and of itself from adult books these days, but have you seen it change a lot in the last, it's changed, I think, for adults books enormously in the last several decades. Would you say that's still true in children's books as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And especially in the last 5 to 10 years, Amazon, Kindles, ebooks, the independent bookstores disappearing, so that you can no longer go into a bookstore and I count on going into a bookstore, and with a picture book, you really need to pick it up and turn the pages. You cannot go to Amazon and just see the Dr. Seuss cover. You can't tell all the other books out there, and you need to be able to flip the pages. So I think the pressures on publishing have been tremendous since in like the past 5 and 10 years, and they're just sort of catching up and dealing with the whole the internet and how things have changed in publishing. It can be a little bit scary too. I'm very lucky to have gotten into it when I did, but you see a lot more. The joke we have is, I think it's much easier to get into publishing now if you have a late night talk show first, or if you're a movie star. So I think that's part of the change, is having that recognizable if you're an actor or a movie. And it's happening, I think, in a lot of fields, not just books.
I just also want to note that both of the websites that these women have are fabulous, completely different, but very active, very, interesting blogs, interesting writing. And a Facebook page that's also just going gangbusters. I know, I can only imagine, but totally worth going there. They're both terrific. Yes.
I have a question for Bonnie. I so enjoyed that book because I've been canoeing on the White River and I know that area well.
Yeah.
What's next for you? Are you going to do something with Hopper's wife? She was so instrumental in his success.
Yes, she certainly was, but I think all I've done with her is here, and there's a little bit on my website. I've enjoyed it. I'm not crazy about ebooks, I'll tell you. I love to just hold a book, whether it's a picture book or my own. But I like the internet and the social media. It's certainly been great for marketing and promotion, but it's been great on my website to write little bits and pieces of things or to flesh things out that I couldn't really do in the book, or maybe take one of the footnotes and write it out. And I did a little bit of that about Joe Hopper. And but in terms of writing more about her, one of the things that people ask me about all the time is what happened to her paintings. And when the Hoppers died, they had no children, and their artistic estates were essentially left to the Whitney. And to a few, Joe's works, a few things were left to friends. Some things were left in Hopper's family home in Nyack, and the person who bought that got them. But they're scattered, and many of them are lost. There is a story still to be told, but it has to be told by the people who have access to the paintings, either through association with the Whitney or the family friends. And if you look on my website, I do have links to some articles about Joe that will tell you more about her. But I know lots of people are curious, so that's a book waiting to happen, but it has to be done by people who have access to the materials.
You made us curious.
Yeah, and it continues this, I mean, this is a book that came out, but it's wonderful because on the website, the stories keep expanding. So it's this, it isn't really ending. I mean, what an adventure
I'm still
you stepped
having
into.
fun with it, and I keep saying, you know, well, I'm done, I'm moving on. I just had my basement renovated. That's been a major thing. Actually, next, what I would like to write about, probably not a book, but maybe a short piece, is another person I discovered who was born in South Royalton, a missionary named Sarah Joyner Lyman, who went to the Sandwich Islands in 1830. And I lived in Hawaii for many years, and I knew all about Sarah Joyner Lyman because she kept wonderful journals and wrote letters, and really is one of the great sources for historians of what happened on the island of Hawaii in the mid-19th century. And I was amazed to find out that she was born in Royalton. So I'm very interested in telling the Vermont side of her story. So that may be next.
Vermont is lucky to get the Vermont side of these different stories. There's probably time for one more question. Anyone else? Yes.
I really enjoyed hearing sort of the juxtaposition of both of your stories, from the researcher to the creative. My question is sort of maybe to both of you, maybe start with you, Tracey, is sort of the source of creativity. Like here we are in this beautiful sanctuary, so it makes me think about sort of at what level does a source for the creative process, what sparks that? And then for Bonnie, what's the inspiration behind sort of delving into the level that you do for research? So that's sort of a source question to both of you.
Well, I think, you know, it's a mystery, and it really isn't a lot of, and what a lot of people have tried to figure out, you know, where that all comes from, and I remember reading somewhere where someone was saying it's really about just being present and being open and being ready, that everyone has that magic fairy is out there for everyone, and if you're just ready for it and able to catch it when it lands. And I would be an artist if I had stayed in New York, but my books would be different. They would be city books. I would have architecture, buildings, and I moved to Vermont, and so that has, and this is where I live, so that is a source of my inspiration. And a big reason I moved to Vermont was for community and family. And I remember very early on complaining to a dear friend back in New York saying, well, I'll never win the Caldecott because they're all saving the world and about all these big issues. And she said, but your books are all about community and family and what's more important to a young child. And I think as this world gets bigger and more complicated, living in Vermont, being here, and knowing the importance of community, town meeting, things that we have here that are harder to find in other parts of the country, and I travel around and speak a lot in places. The only thing that I did find that they have in other parts of the country, I was speaking in the middle of Ohio once, and I was talking to these young kids, and I said, oh, and yes, and we have a farm. They were asking about the animals, and I said, yes, and there's one farm that we have a camel. And this other child says, oh yeah, Susie has a camel on her farm too. And I said, no. But yeah, so you never know. But I think community is a big part of where we live, and we're very, very fortunate, and it's an impact on my work as well.
And Bonnie, your inspiration that kind of keeps you going, it's like you have a fever for research.
Yes, I do love to do research, sometimes about things that no one else in the world cares about. But I always have, from the time high school years, I guess. I love to explore libraries, and Vermont has wonderful libraries, and I've been to University of Vermont recently for the first time because Mike's going back to Philadelphia every other week, and I take him to the Burlington airport, and then I go to the library. It's great. But to me, it's just absolutely thrilling, especially to find in archives something that's handwritten. Joe Hopper's letters, which I didn't get to, I actually did see some original ones, but mostly copies. But anything, any little piece of just the trivia that you come across. When I was researching in the Whitney, every time I would come across in these piles and piles of files and documents and copies and letters and you name it, any mention of Vermont, I would squeal. And they got to know me they said, oh, you found something about Vermont. But I just find it very exciting and interesting. Now, writing this book although I was an editor for many years, I rewrote other people's things. I've always loved to write. And writing very short pieces, even administrative stuff, I noticed a long time ago that I'm much more articulate when I write, and that there are things in me that come out when I write that I didn't really even know were there. And it's not just expression, it's thoughts and feelings, and that is just an absolutely wonderful, and I would say addictive experience, and I don't want to give that up. I'm not sure whether it'll be the missionary, it'll be my next topic or whatever, but I just love that, sitting down and all of a sudden, you've said something that you didn't even know you thought.
Wow.
Yeah. I should say I. And still, when I pick up this book and I think, I wrote this. I said this. I still can't believe it. It's a wonderful experience.
I want to thank you both. This has been really a terrific conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.